Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we have another episode of PC Archeology, and on today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this machine, an Agfa Compugraphic 9000 PS. I think it's a computer, I think it's a PC inside, but I'm actually not sure. This was sent in on a recent Turbo Mail Call episode by viewer Joe from Nashville, Tennessee, who rescued this from a print shop while he was there saving an iMac G3 that he wanted. It basically made him take this thing, and he thought it looked enough like a computer that he thought he would send it to me so that I could make an exploration video showing what's going on inside of this thing. I'm super curious because it certainly has the form factor of a PC, but when we take a look at the back in a moment, things look a little bit different, and I'm not so sure exactly what we're going to find inside of this thing. So join me while we explore this thing, do a little bit of research on what this Compugraphic 9000 PS is, and without further ado, let's get right to it. Before I dig into a little bit of history on what this thing actually is, let's take a look at the outside of this case, just to get our bearings. As I mentioned in the intro, this is an Agfa Compugraphic 9000 PS. There's a postscript logo, Agfa's brand, and what looks like a power LED. Agfa is a company that makes photographic equipment, paper, film, cameras, printers, all sorts of stuff like that, and they have been doing it for a very long time. On the right side, we have two exposed drive bays where the original faceplates have been removed. This one is just metal, and this one has what looks like an ID selector and a single button, couple LEDs. If anything, I would think this is a SCSI drive emulator, or perhaps this is just a control panel that goes to some kind of controller inside the machine that allows you to select a SCSI ID. On the rest of the front, there's really nothing much going on. There are no ports or anything like that. We have some yellowing, and the front faceplate is a little bit loose, but this thing is very heavy and it suffered some damage in shipping, so that could be from that. Looking at the backside, this is PC case-like, but also pretty customized. We have what looks like a somewhat standard AT-style power supply, the type with the chunky power switch on the side. We do have an Agfa Corporation badge, and it shows model number 02336. There's a part number, same thing with a -505. And we do have a manufacture date of October 1989. So that gives us a little bit of idea of when this thing was made. Made in, looks like Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA. In this middle section, we have this image recorder port, and this is one of those larger, I think 37-pin connectors, two blank outs that potentially would be for a keyboard jack. And it was interesting, if this case was originally designed to house something like an IBM 5150 clone, we'd have a keyboard jack and the cassette port. And I'm definitely curious to see what's behind there, but I guess I'll wait until we open this thing up. Continuing over to where we would normally have ISA slots, we have this blanking plate with a Centronics, an AppleTalk, and a serial port. If you're wondering about this AppleTalk jack, this is the older style AppleTalk 9-pin connector that would have been common on the Mac 128 and 512. When Apple released the Mac Plus and all the following Macs after that, the AppleTalk connector was a normal mini DIN. But maybe this device was originally designed or is based on something that was designed in the early days of the Macintosh when AppleTalk was still this 9-pin D sub, like on those original ones. And finally, looking at the bottom of the machine, we don't have any labels, but we do have the same type of slot things, I don't know what you would call this, where the power supply connects to, exactly like on the original XT and on the 5170 power supply also has this, which means there's a good chance that this is just a normal AT type power supply inside this case, which hopefully means that we have a lot of PC architecture inside of here. When I was growing up, my father was a graphic designer and moved from doing everything on paper and cutting stuff out to using computers. And this was in the mid 80s. He had a Macintosh Plus that he did for that, and then he upgraded along the way. So I'm kind of familiar with what this thing likely is. Almost certainly because we have a postscript logo on the front of this next to the Compugraphic 9000 tells us that this is almost certainly an RIP or a RIP machine, a raster image processor. What a raster image processor was used for, and almost certainly what this is, and also many other printers needed them. If you think about what a printer is, even really, really high quality ones, they work on rasters, kind of like a CRT. A laser printer has a scanning laser beam that goes across a drum, and that laser affects an electrostatically charged drum that when the toner, which is the powder that gets put onto the drum, well, it causes it to stick to the places where the laser was and it falls off the rest of it. So when it rolls over that paper, it transfers that toner onto the paper and then it's fused onto there on the final stage, and then you get your printout. So really the laser printer is a raster image, just like a CRT. It's being scanned. So what PostScript is, which was originally made by Adobe, is it tries to solve the problem of different printers having different resolutions by describing your entire page using vectors and elements and fonts that are vector based. That way, if you print on a low resolution printer or a high resolution printer, it doesn't really matter because the description of the page and all the graphics and everything that's laid out on it is totally vector based and coordinate based in a way that it doesn't matter how high resolution or low resolution your printer is. So you always get the same type of output, just the difference of resolution on the final stage. So what a RIP or raster image processor does is it takes that description language and it converts it into a high resolution image. So this thing, if it's a RIP and say it was designed for a printer that's 2000 dots per inch, so an entire width of paper is however many dots that is, this thing has to convert that human readable description language into a very high resolution image that it can then stream over that connection, that 37-pin connector we saw in the back, to the printer. The CPU that's in here isn't going to be fast enough to do this all in real time and stream it to the printer in real time. So you have to print to this device using probably the serial port, the AppleTalk port, or the Centronics port. You print with PostScript. It uploads the PostScript page description into the buffer of this thing, and it sits here and kind of churns for a while it renders out the high resolution image, and then it holds that in a frame buffer, and then it will stream the frame buffer over that port directly to the printing engine. Now, in a lot of printers, like say the Apple Image Writer, it was a PostScript native printer, and it actually had the RIP built into it. It was a Motorola 68000 on the early ones, and I'm sure the later ones had faster processors. And plenty of other printers had similar setups where there was a CPU inside the printer that would take the description language, which could also be like the HP markup language. I think it was what called HPL. And then that would be rendered into the printable output inside the printer. Well, PostScript is a lot more capable than the HP markup language. Therefore, it was preferred by graphic designers. And you can be sure if your computer was outputting PostScript from like whatever program you were using to do your design work, you were going to get consistent output from one printer to another. Even if it was a different vendor, the rendering inside the RIP was going to make sure that it's going to render, according to the standards of PostScript, Adobe PostScript, and you will get your nice clear output. So almost certainly, this is the RIP for a high resolution Agfa printer that probably printed at ultra high resolution, probably on some type of photographic film in a large format even. And this would be something that a print shop would have, which would obviously be beyond the reach of a normal person to afford for their home. So you would take your disk with your output PostScript file and then load it into this, or maybe they would stick it into a computer on premises. So say you had like a PageMaker file, they'd have a Mac with PageMaker running on it, hooked up to this thing with AppleTalk. They would print with the right drivers, it would output the PostScript data to this, and then it would sit there and churn and render it out and then actually print it on the printer. I remember my father, when he bought his Mac Plus, he had an Apple Laser Writer, which was an incredibly expensive printer at the time. And its printing process was so slow. A, because AppleTalk is already pretty slow. So you're transferring over some fonts and whatever the PostScript description is. But then that 68000 in the printer would sit there and render at 300 dots per inch, which is what that printer engine could support. And it took quite a long time to print. But the good thing is he could do proofs and get really good output that sometimes were good enough for actually publication, depending on what it was going to. But once he had a proof that was good, he'd go down to the print shop or the image setter, and they would print on a super high resolution printer, something like this. And then that would be the final output that would then go to the publisher or wherever this thing was going. So really, yeah, I had experience understanding what the whole technology of the raster image processor was all about. And without a doubt, that's exactly what this thing is here. So I did a little bit of Googling for this particular model here. This is the 9000 PS, and I found this Omni Knowledge Database article from Agfa, dated September 17, 1992, and it talks about the hard disk format procedure for the Star 200, 400, and 600. So it reads, a portion of the drive on the Star 200 AccuSet 400, 600 is now used by Agfa for disk FIFOing. This feature increases the RIP throughput by pipelining the rasterization process. The increase in throughput only occurs in conjunction with Ethernet input, which this thing does not have. So this was obviously for a later version of this that had Ethernet added to it. It goes on to talk about how to actually format the drive, and it says some old procedure is out of date. And assuming 213 meg hard drive from the Star 200, here's the command, and I don't really recognize this command format here, 00 initialized disk and this stuff here. But we can kind of assume that this is probably running some kind of Unix on here, or like SCO Unix perhaps. And I'm thinking this is probably going to be not some kind of custom ASIC stuff. Well, there will be ASICs in here, but I bet you the computer portion is probably just a normal Intel stuff. And judging by the fact it's 1989, it's probably a 386. And this would have been a very expensive piece of kit. And it looks like the original AccuSet 1200 had a 200 meg drive, and then the later versions, 400 and 1.05 gigabyte. You know what? Look at this. This is bringing back memories now. This is PostScript. When you have the % symbol and then PS Adobe 1.0, so PostScript, that's the first version. Yeah, I guess this formatting process actually happens with PostScript commands themselves. How freaking interesting. Look at the end. Disk is not available for formatting. Check cables, reboot, rip, and retry. End. Yep, so that's a PostScript file. And essentially, if you had a PostScript file that was for an actual printed page, it would have, you know, fonts. It would specify fonts that might be needed to be loaded into memory as well. And then any vector images and where the fonts are around the page and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's all sort of commands like this. It's human readable. So a little bit more Googling brought me to this, the Agfa ProSet 9400 and 9600 printing specifications. I have a feeling that this printer is probably what this RIP goes to. And I don't have concrete information yet, since this stuff was very niche and specific to printing houses and wouldn't be something any consumers would have. So there's just really not a lot of documentation for this. And of course, Agfa themselves no longer, publish any documentation on their old legacy products like this. So the Agfa 9400, 9600 series image setters are basically the same. Difference is the 9400 has a single laser diode, while the 9600 has a laser beam. That's not very clear. Maybe actually uses a laser tube, so higher output than the laser diode. The 9600 is a Flaster engine, and the 9400 and 9600 were built to produce simple black and white negatives, and some customers even produce spot color separations. However, the registration was always a problem with these machines. So what that's saying is this is a monochrome device. And you could do color if you do CMYK, so that's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. That's what CMYK stands for, and you could print 4 separate outputs from this image setter. And it's talking about registration being a problem, so that means, I guess, every time you print through this printer, it's not exactly aligned on the page every time. So when you try to combine those together with little registration marks, which are little crosshairs, you might have some issues with offsetting. If you only output black and white paper or negatives and you do not intend to output spot color, then the 9400, 9600 may be right for you. So it looks like both of these print engines support up to 2400 DPI. And you look at that now and you're like, oh, that's not that high. But let me tell you, in the 80s, that was incredibly high. All of the consumer laser printers that existed were pretty high resolution at 300, but that just wasn't good enough for certain types of printing. And that's why you had to use stuff like this that was incredibly expensive at these much higher resolutions. And it allowed you to do line screens, which is when you take a black and white printout and you do kind of a halftone pattern on it. So you can print pictures, like in the newspaper. A black and white print in the newspaper would still show pictures, and it's using a line screen. And the higher your DPI, the higher your lines per inch could be for your line screens, which is another reason why these types of printers worked so well for printing black and white, because the pictures actually looked pretty good. The little dots that could make up the picture were much more clear than on a 300 DPI printer at home. Looks like this printer was 300 to 400 pounds or 135 kilograms, so extremely heavy. And it appeared that the page width was 13.3 inches or 55.5 centimeters wide. And maybe you could have any length as well, depending on the kind of paper you fed into it. And the media type was films, RC paper, and set print polyester plate material, Agfa set print. I don't really understand what that stuff is. I know the home stuff better than I know what was used in a professional standpoint. But I do remember my father would go down to the print shop and have stuff printed on these really high resolution printers. It did come back kind of with a shiny texture, not quite gloss like a photograph, but it definitely didn't feel like just normal paper. So it was like some kind of media like this. And then indeed the input media was in feet, 150 feet or 100-foot film. So that's why the width was important, like 13 inches wide, but then the length could be any length. So I started looking for more info on these 9400 image setters, which I suspect this goes with. And this looks like it's got the RIP right here, the raster image processor sitting right next to it. Can we make these bigger? Yes. Take a look at this. That's not the same thing this thing has on it with this SCSI ID selector and the button and those two LEDs. Now, it's got a power switch on the front that this thing doesn't have, so this looks different, but that's the same image setter we were just looking at. This must be something to do with the printing process, or I don't know, that can't be the film, right? That's too small. Backside, silver digiplate film for LD. Okay, so here's the badge on this image setter. So it's a 9400. Look how the part number is similar. Wasn't this also a 2366 with a different 3 digits at the end? And 1991, so a couple of years newer than this thing. And we keep going. Oh, this must be the RIP, because this has the voltage selector just like this thing does. So this picture, yeah, generated by AI. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know why. The model number is different. I can't remember what the model number is in this, and I can't see it right now because this thing's turned around the wrong way. Property of Color Copy Incorporated. And oh yes, there it is, the money shot. That's it. That is this machine. This printer, or this picture, is terrible. Let's see if we can get closer in. So this stand-up enclosure clearly is just something to house this RIP in a nicer form factor. We saw a power switch on the front of the enclosure, so that power cable must go to that physical switch in the front. But if we look, this looks very similar, but no, quite different actually, because look, it doesn't have the blanking plates for the keyboard ports like this one has. And these extra ports, I can't quite make out what's what. They're down on the bottom here. So they've sort of redone the case. So this must be a newer version of the raster image processor than we have here. But we can't see this big thick cable, and it looks like it's got that 36 pin connector on it, or 37 pin I think it is, and that's what would go to the image setter. That's basically the output of the rasterization process that then goes to the print engine, so it can actually print it, with the laser. So all right, so that pretty much confirms it, that this is the image processor, the raster image processor for one of those image setters from Agfa. And I guess the next step is to dig into this thing and see exactly what's going on inside this RIP. Is this a PC? Place your bets down below. Is there going to be battery damage? And will I be able to get this thing powered up? And maybe the hard drive can work and we can try to investigate exactly what's on that drive. Maybe it runs MS-DOS. Maybe it's running who knows what, some kind of custom OS. There are so many questions to investigate with this thing. All right, let me get the camera repositioned and let's open this up. Okay, so let me figure out how to get this thing apart. We got some pretty large fasteners holding down the top cover. With the 3 fasteners on the top removed, it looks like the cover should slide back towards us, but it doesn't move. And I think that's because there's a big bashed corner. I might have to get a hammer and try to hammer this apart a little bit. Although I just had a thought that maybe there are some fasteners on the front as well. So I just popped the front cover off. I just kind of gave it a little push, and it does have 3 clips that aren't broken. And this has a date of September 12th, 1989, and right there, September 8th, 1989. And with us looking at the front, well, that exposes that it does have a little hard drive here, and very much like the 5170, we have fasteners here that allow us to slide these things out. Now inside, I get a glimpse of the motherboard and I see a whole bunch of ROM chips, and there's also a large metal plate that's attached. So I'm assuming this is not a standard PC motherboard. I'll be very curious to see what's in here. I'm taking a sneak peek inside. I know you can't see what I'm looking at, but there's lots and lots of chips. The motherboard is huge, takes up the entire case. It is definitely not a standard PC motherboard. I don't see any ISA slots in there. Everything looks quite custom. Well, there were no fasteners on the front. There's just really the 3 on the top here, but this case does not budge. So I'm gonna have to get a little medieval on the corner here just to try to free it up. Okay, I'm just using a screwdriver to pry, and it is starting to budge. You gotta pull, because this bent corner is really making it difficult. Oh, it's quite mashed up there. Okay, I think I've got it. It was just wedged in there. One thing I'm getting from this, and I haven't mentioned this, is there's quite a strong odor of cigarettes. So I guess whatever print shop this was in, they must have smoked in there a lot. Oh, very interesting. Very freaking interesting. Okay, let me get you over here so you can see what I'm seeing. All right, well, this is very cool to look at. So we do have a very standard IBM PC style power supply. And look, it even has normal AT power supply connectors up here. And this is the raster image processor, or actually the output board that goes to the printer, because this ribbon cable is what goes to that 36 or 37 pin connector. Now, it has a Motorola 68000 at 8 megahertz, meaning this whole board is its own computer. So we have SRAM, we got some ROMs, looks like more SRAM, various PALs and whatnot. And this is obviously handling the power that goes from the AT connector down to the main board through this harness. Now, someone wrote on this connection P1 on IO. So this must be the IO board, or what's called the IO board. And I'm assuming someone's had some service done to this thing. On the front, we actually have the connection that goes to the single power LED that's on the front of the case. I'm just going to grab some photographs of things because I will dump these ROMs in case anyone ever is trying to revive one of these, and maybe these ROMs are more updated than someone else's. These look like they have dates of 1990 on these stickers. Let's get this board out of the case. Okay, so there is the IO board freed up. We'll take a look at that, a closer look in a second. Also removed this metal plate so we can see underneath it. And wow, would you look at that board? The main motherboard, that's a lot of RAM there for that rasterization of the high resolution printer. This must have cost so much money. Now this is that metal plate I was talking about that I could see through the front cover. Get that off of there. All right, that bar removed. This thing is obviously built to very high standards, and yet it's quite easy to take apart. I can see, by the way, I didn't mention that it looks like it has a 40 megabyte quantum SCSI hard drive. So first thing I'm going to do is, outside of this computer, I'm going to use the SCSI initiator mode on a blue SCSI to try to dump that, because I'm afraid, we run it once to try to boot this thing and it might die. And we don't want to have that happen on potentially the only known copy of such a drive. So there's our Aztec branded regular IBM PC 5170 style AT power supply. All pretty much bog standard, and this without a doubt would just work perfectly in any IBM PC clone case, the clones of the 5170. Standard connector, standard pretty much everything. And being Aztec branded, these are extremely, extremely good quality. This has a date of the 12th week of 1989. There's a good chance that this works, but I'm not gonna risk it. I'll test this separately, maybe on a second channel video, and I could just use my normal bench power supply that I use for testing regular PC motherboards to try to get this thing fired up. So what do we need to do now? I need to get that motherboard out of there, because I want to bench test this thing in this video, and we can take a closer look at it with the top-down camera on the bench. Okay, so I'm going to get the hard drive out of here. Hopefully this thing survived. There's our Quantum Pro drive, and it says there 9000 PS font disk version 4. The hard drive itself looks absolutely bog standard, just a regular SCSI drive. It's got termination. It's funny how it has a plus chip on here. Plus hard cards, I think those existed before Quantum bought them, and then Quantum bought them and seemed to be using some plus chips still at that point. Anyways, yeah, 1988 firmware on this Quantum Corp drive. Pretty bog standard, and hopefully this thing works. Someone wrote on the SCSI cable to Quantum Drive, up. I also need this front I/O panel. Now this connected up to the I/O board. It actually did not go to the motherboard, or am I mistaken? Yes, it plugged in right there. And now we can get a look at the processor. Motorola 68020 with spot for, I assume, a math coprocessor or maybe a memory management unit. An absolute ton of ROM chips. And these all say copyright Adobe Systems on them. So I guess this is the PostScript processing engine and potentially the entire OS that this thing runs. Did Adobe design this board? Is this actually made by Agfa? It does say Agfa on the corner here. We'll get a closer look at this on the bench once I get this out of the case. And one thing is for sure is, yeah, there's definitely cigarette smoke tar. Oh yeah, it smells pretty bad under the power supply there. It's sort of a brown color. So let's get all of these ports off the back so I can keep them. Not that I'm ever going to be able to use this thing, but we want to at least be able to see if we can get to a console or something on here to see if there's any kind of diagnostics. I'm thinking now that that hard drive is simply for font storage, since essentially with PostScript you could transfer fonts into the rasterization engine. This was no different than on an Apple laser writer. And then you could save those fonts there. So that way in the future, if the font matched, you didn't have to transfer it again. So that totally could mean that this doesn't boot any kind of operating system, so to speak. I mean, obviously it's got a file system support, but just like any other embedded system, it doesn't have a normal operating system like, you know, with processes and threads and multitasking and a console. It's not running Linux or Unix. It might just be handling that PostScript engine, and that's it. Okay, all those ports have been removed, so that means I can get the motherboard out. Look at this thing. Looking down into the case, they have removed what would have been the normal mounting structure for IBM PC AT motherboards. So this is clearly, you know, based on an AT case, but heavily customized, and they took away most of what would allow it to work as an AT case. The only thing that's left are these little plastic standoffs, which I can pop these out. And these are used on the IBM PC 5170 and similar clones to hold the edge of the motherboard. So I'll be keeping these. Also, I have to say that these rubber feet that go under the motherboard, these are pretty cool, and they're very well stuck down there, but I'm going to try to get these off because I think these are the same feet that go on the Apple Lisa and the Apple Profile hard drive. And I don't have the feet for the Apple Lisa, so I need these. A plastic scraper and some IPA made very quick work of those, and I think I pretty much got everything out of this case that I want. And yes, I'm going to be recycling this case, since I know people are going to be sad to hear, but pretty much this motherboard is going to become a parts donor. I mean, we're going to play with it in this video, but after that, I mean, there's really nothing I can ever do with this. I'm never going to have an Agfa image setter. And one of the things I read online is that image setter that this goes with, that 9400, 9600, they don't even make the film and paper that goes with that thing anymore. So it's impossible to even use them if you even had one. Like if someone needed this to go with their image setter. So this video really is just about exploration and investigation and documentation of what this thing is. And I can dump those ROMs, and I can dump the hard drive, and I can dump the ROM on the IO board, and then we can fire it up and see if it does anything. Here are all the relevant components from our raster image processor. Let's start at the top. So there's our branding for this particular board, PSATS1++. Looks like 1986, the PCB was designed, so it's definitely an older design. You can see all of our PostScript ROMs that make up, I guess, the operating system of this raster image processor. There's a good amount of those there, and I don't really know if I should be thinking about dumping these or if these are readily available out there. I'm going to have to peel the sticker off one of these to see how large these are, but you can see how these are arranged with LL0, LM0, HM0, and HH0. So this is the first part of the code, and it's arranged 8 bits each, so 32-bit processor. So we require 4 chips per, I guess, section. Although the interesting thing is we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's in this 32-bit arrangement. But if we take a look over here on the edge, we also have 4. Oh yeah, okay, so these are 4 more chips for the 4th section, or 5th section actually, for 32 bits. For our processor, 68020 at 16 megahertz, and there is our crystal oscillator that almost certainly runs it. I think this is actually going to be the memory management unit, just not installed in here. The math coprocessor has a larger footprint from my recollection. We do have a configuration jumper, so I don't know, take note of that if you are trying to replicate this board somehow. All of these PAL chips do have these little stickers on it, and they are all over the board, and they are reducing the amount of TTL logic that this thing has. We do have position for extra jumpers that are just fixed in place. This is where the power comes in from the IO board down to this main processor board. You will notice that this thing is loaded up with little tantalums, so very easily any of these could be shorted, so I will check that and make sure those aren't shorted before we try to power this thing up. Lots more PAL chips all over the board. I think this Z-Core 2804, this might be a static RAM chip, although I'd have to look up the part number to be totally sure that 45 might mean 45 nanoseconds. Then we have two 6522s, very standard parts from 1989, a bunch of TTL logic. We have a Zilog SCC, so this is a serial controller IC, almost certainly going to be used probably for the serial port, or potentially actually this is for the AppleTalk port. These MK4501s, I had to look up what this is. I thought maybe it was static RAM at first, but these seem to be FIFOs, first in, first out buffers. And there are a bunch of them on this board. Well, by bunch, I mean there are 4 of them. It seems that you can write data into these, and they have multiple registers for the data to be held, and then something can read it out. So it must be maybe used in conjunction with these to act as like latches or something like that, just to allow this thing to, I don't know, read and write to the IO ports at the same time as doing other stuff. Not too sure. Below the serial controller is the AM5380. This is a SCSI controller IC, and there's the SCSI port there, so makes sense that in the proximity. Although it's kind of interesting that this is up here while the AppleTalk connection is down here. Not to mention the Centronics parallel is down here, which could easily be driven from those 6522s. What you see here are zip DRAM chips, and there's a good amount of them. Now we obviously have room for 2 more banks. My assumption is these are 1 bit wide each, so it's probably gonna be 32, or maybe there's gonna be parity as well. So that means, well, I gotta look at the part numbers on these to see how large these are. These could be 256 kilobits, and if they are, that means that's 1 megabyte with a total of 4 megabytes with a total of 6 megabytes possible on the board. Yeah, I just took a look. Those are MT RAM and they are 256 kilobit by 1. So indeed, this is 1 megabyte, 2, 3, 4 megabytes total. And they have 120 nanosecond access time. What I do find kind of odd with this arrangement is that they could have easily installed SIM sockets. They totally existed when this board was designed, and they could have done away with this ridiculous, expensive, hard way of installing memory. And to replicate this amount of memory, you'd have 256K SIMs, but you could easily put 1 meg SIMs on there and have far more memory, although maybe that doesn't really benefit this processing engine to have additional RAM. I just peeled up the sticker on one of these EEPROMs, and yeah, they are AM27C256s, so 32 kilobytes each, and remember that we need 4 of them for, well, 32 bits wide, which gives us 128K for 4 of these chips. So that means that with this amount of EEPROMs, if my math is correct, that is 640 kilobytes of ROM code, and then we have this additional 4 megabytes of RAM. Now with a 32-bit processor on board, really we don't have any constraints with the memory map on this thing. Even the old 68,000 had 16 megabytes of memory space, but that one can go far beyond that. Now let's look at the bottom side of the board. Wow, it's a beautiful gold color, which I kind of assume is the color that it would have been on the top as well. That PCB looks so nice, but it is a little bit of a bodge-tasticness going on here. So we've got bodges all around here. Very professionally done, but you have to think this is going to be a very low volume product, and to manufacture a board like this would be extremely expensive. So it's definitely worth doing the rework on here. And I guess, yeah, like just a little bit of dust is what's keeping that beautiful gold color from really showing up on this side. Now let's take a closer look at what I assume is the I/O board. Revision C with our 68,000 processor and our 2 ROMs because it is 16-bit, and our SRAM chips because, again, 16 bits. The chip is marked with an 8 megahertz processor, and we have an 8 megahertz crystal oscillator along with a 16 megahertz one and a 3.68. This board has an MC68681 on here, and this is a dual UART, input-output UART. So probably this is going to be used to talk to the print engine. We can be pretty much sure of that. But we have several PAL ICs. This is the main connection that goes from this board down to the other board. And I'm going to check my photos, but there's an extra connector on here that I don't think was actually populated. And indeed, checking the photograph, that's the connection that goes down to the main board. This is the one that goes to the actual print engine. That's the power connector. That's the front panel. And that one was not populated. And this little front plate has a button here for, I guess, the stop, and I don't know what these mean, printing and power, something like that, and then the ID switch. Not sure if this has to do, well, it goes all the way up to 9. So SCSI goes from 0 to 7. So since this has 10 positions, maybe that's just more an ID for if you have multiple of these printers and you're printing over AppleTalk. This just helps it figure out which one you're talking to, perhaps. And on the back side of the I/O board, nothing much to report. Doesn't look as nice as the gold one. We do have a small few bodges. And here's our quantum hard drive, the font disk. It does have the rails that are used for that case, and we looked at this before. It's just pretty standard quantum hard drive. I guess the question is, does this drive work? These are pretty reliable drives, I have to say, from my experience in the past. I think first things first, I'm going to get the blue SCSI out, and we're going to try to dump the contents of this so we can look at what's going on. It's set to SCSI ID 0, which is fine. It's terminated as it needs to be. So I'm going to get the blue SCSI connected up, and I'm going to configure the blue SCSI for initiator mode. So there's that jumper, and there's this jumper that should be on, and I'm going to need to edit the config file. I have this all plugged into my bench power supply. It's off right now, but the big question is going to be is, will this drive actually spin up? Let's see what happens. 3, 2, 1. No, it's got stiction. Okay, I can help that. I'm going to give it a little nudge to try to get this to spin. I heard it go, it like tried to spin. So the disk spindle is about right here in the middle of the drive. This is the head assembly up here. You can tell that because you can look at the side here. You can see where it curves in. That's where the disk is. So what you can try to do is give this a spin like that to try to get it to break free. See if that helped. That did not help. I'm going to have to open this thing up and we're going to have to give it a little bit of a nudge to get the disk spinning. I don't need this drive to last long term. I just need it to work long enough for us to get a good image from the blue SCSI. Now, besides the 6 fasteners that hold the top on around the edge, there are some under these stickers as well. I'm not sure about that one, but I think this one for sure has a fastener. So we're going to have to cut this open. There we go. Oh yeah, the disk is stuck. What I'm going to do is turn on the power. There we go. That's all I needed to do. Let's get this back on. Okay, let's get it going with the lid. Oh no, it's still not spinning. Come on. I didn't let it go for long enough. The grease on that motor, I guess, is just gummed up. I didn't want to run it excessively long with the lid off. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. I don't want dust to fall in there, which is why I put the lid back on. Plus I could spit on it while I'm talking. Although I didn't even see a read-write head on that top surface. I think there's only a head on the bottom side. I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to plug the blue SCSI into it now. And we're going to try to image it while it's still spinning. I mean, it sounds normal now that it's running. Checking the lights on the blue SCSI. There we go. I can hear it imaging. Yes, it's imaging. There's a little bit of a breeze coming out of the hard drive. Can you see the dust that's right there? Yeah, the spinning drive does create some, I don't know, Bernoulli effect or whatever. It creates a bit of a wind in there. I'm pretty sure it's imaging right now. Uh-oh. Some terrible noise just came out of the drive. Now with this particular firmware on the blue SCSI, when it's finished with this dumping process, it will spin the drive down. So we'll shut the drive off. So I just need to wait until that happens. I feel like it should have already imaged the drive by now. I'm going to take the card out and just take a look to see if there's logs. Okay, you know what? It was actually doing the imaging. There's a file on there with 39 megabytes, and I wasn't patient enough. So I'm going to reset the power, and we're going to start this again. I don't know why this firmware doesn't actually flash an LED on the blue SCSI to tell you that it's, doing it, but it doesn't. I will be more patient this time and just let this sit here, and hopefully this will finish and the drive will spin down. I think I see what happens. The reason why it was taking so long is it was encountering errors on the drive. So it's scanning for the drives, it found the quantum drive, it started copying, it's going like 500-600K per second. It's zooming along, and then it gets an error right here. So I had an error and it switches to a slower mode. Notice only going like 100K per second. So it takes a lot longer. And then it encountered more errors, bunch of errors, but then it kept going after that and actually went back to full speed. So it's going, and it was almost done when I freaking took the card out. Oh, got another error there. Okay, it's getting a lot of errors at the end there. So I just need to let it sit there and retry until it gets a good image. But I did save the image that it had so far, which is this right here. So this is like the 30-something megabytes that got removed from this drive. So sys root, display list, fonts. Oh, the drive just spun down. So I guess it finished. Some Adobe PostScript stuff, Avant-Garde, Bookman, Demi, these are fonts, yes. Okay, so I don't think this is holding much but fonts. Don't know what this BM stuff is. Now it seems that the software that's running on this was actually written by Adobe, and on those ROM chips it said copyright linotype as well. I'm wondering if this firmware is very similar to what runs on an Apple LaserWriter printer. Like, did Adobe write that firmware as well? Kind of possible that the format of this hard drive here is actually well understood and people could extract these fonts. I don't know if there was any fonts that are lost to time that are maybe on this drive. Is that possible? Is this something that's worth saving? This is the image that I just created, 41,000 kilobytes, and the log file. And the one I was impatient and just stopped it, you can see that it wasn't quite there. It was at 38 megabytes or so. So this is the log file from the dump I just made. Did this work better, or do we still have errors? Okay, we got some errors there, just like we did last time. So this drive has some bad sectors or whatnot. Okay, so it's going quick again. And then remember, we saw a bunch of errors right near the end. Okay, up 95%, failed, failed, failed. There it is, it got to 100 and then stopped. There were 5 bad sectors that could not be read off the drive. So even with 5 bad sectors, maybe there's some useful data on there, useful to someone. I gotta say, this Blue SCSI initiator mode thing is a godsend because, you know, with a hard drive like this, who knows how long this thing would have lasted, especially having opened it up. And therefore, I have an image, the best image we could possibly get from this drive. And that means I can just change this back to run in emulation mode. And then we can plug this back into, you know, the actual system. And, you know, if this hard drive is needed for it to boot up, well, it's got the hard drive now. It's got an emulated copy of it. Do you think this drive is still going to spin now that it's been running for a few minutes? Let's see. Nope. Still doesn't spin on its own. So, oh, there we go. I heard it give a clunk and now it's running. Probably just let this thing run for a while and it will, wow, just made a terrible clunk noise there. If I just let this thing run for a while, it probably will come back to life and then work. It just won't be reliable. The bearings are gummed up on it. All right, so first thing I think I need to do before I try powering this up is I'm going to check for shorted tantalums. And we all know what happens when I don't do this, like on that 386SX board recently. 14 ohms? That seems a little high. It's not really a dead short, but seems a bit high. Everything else so far is okay. That's the 5-volt rail again. We got 22 ohms on whatever this white wire is. That could be minus 12 volts or something like that. Now, none of those readings were a dead short. It does seem a little bit high, though, I gotta say. 5-volt rail being, yeah, 14 ohms. Interesting. Now, one thing that is curious is the connector that goes to the other board, which isn't connected right now. That appears to just be 5 volts. So that's the 5-volt rail. Ground, we got a couple grounds here. Yeah, and then we got 3 5-volt rails. So there's no minus rail that makes its way over to the other board, even though it's got serial ports and stuff on it. All right, so this would be the way this is connected. I'll unplug it from the other board so we're not taking a reading from that board. So let's see if this thing has shorts on it. 10 ohms. Yeah, 5-volt rail is at 10 ohms. That does seem a little suspect. It really does. I'm wondering if any of these tantalums are just ready to go as soon as I apply power. And if I plug both of these boards in together, it should be even worse now. I bet you it's going to be like 6 ohms or something like that. Look at that guess, 6 ohms. That is very close in resistance on the 5-volt rail to that 36SX board I had, the one where the CPU was getting super hot and the chipset. I mean, it's not a dead short, but I suppose before I plug this in, just in case, maybe I should dump these ROMs. I think I'm going to do that. And all 20 of the ROMs from the PostScript interpreter board have been dumped, along with the 2 ROMs from the I/O board. Now, I merged all of these ROMs, and I also did a strings command on them. So let's take a look at the strings. First, we'll start with the I/O board. Now, it looks like we have some error codes, maybe. Normal, inverse, idle, imaging, booting, boot failed, SIG test, unknown device, error PA completion with a code, illegal message, some more commands or error codes or something. Mode, reset button, debug. Hello, this is the debug port. This is on the I/O board. And this is the board that had the extra connector that didn't seem to be hooked up to anything. And I wonder if that somehow outputs some debug messaging. Type ATI for normal operation. I mean, it implies that you can communicate with the I/O board. Error, illegal, scan switch parameter, unlock error, too many unlocks, and a bunch of stuff here. Memory dump, memory modify, illegal number. So it's possible we can actually talk to this board. I don't know what this thing can do if we did communicate with it, but yeah, there's a hidden debugging mode there. How cool. Okay, now on to the bigger ROMs. Now this first one here, this is 0 strings. So this is at the beginning of memory map, I would assume. It's got a bunch of stuff. Atlas monitor, current halt points, monitor enabled, interrupt to monitor. So this implies this has some type of command line mode you can go into. Unless this is all stuff you communicate like via the PostScript interpreter somehow, because we saw that it has the ability to format the hard drive through the PostScript interpreter. Line 1010 emulator, 1111 emulator, reserved exception, uninitialized. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Interrupts, check instruction, trap, 0 device. So these are CPU errors. And if we keep going down, now we have a ton of what kind of looks like English words, but they're all jammed together. So maybe this is the command set for the PostScript interpreter. Lots and lots and lots of stuff there. Then we have a whole bunch of this, copyright. And it's written this way because I guess this message is meant to be readable when you look at these EPROMs individually. So when I byte merge them, we see each character repeated multiple times, 4 times that is. Copyright 1984, 85, 86, 87, 88, Adobe Systems Incorporated. It says the digitally encoded machine readable outline data for producing the typefaces provided as part of this product is copyright 1981, Linotype and or its subsidiaries, all rights reserved. This data is property of Linotype and may not be reproduced, used, displayed, modified, disclosed, or transferred without the express written approval of Linotype. Now we're getting back to 32-bit stuff. Friendly typeset build time print, gstack, null stream, bunch of stuff. Check password, set password. So these are maybe some commands, I don't know, versions, copyright, bunch of stuff here, isn't there? Yeah, lots. Flushing, job, exit server. And now there's a list of fonts that I guess are built into the ROMs themselves. So we got like Courier Oblique and Helvetica Narrow and so on and so forth. We have a lot more commands. Printer not ready, printer needs attention, failed print start. Going down further, now we have a bunch more of these commands all smashed together again. And look at this. This actually looks like formatted PostScript code directly into ROMs with white space and everything. I think this is how the fonts are defined. Like these are actual stroke information. So these are like the vectors, so to speak. Although I don't know, it seemed like, you know, you need that kind of definition for every single glyph, every letter. And I'm not sure that's actually the case here. Courier bold. See this stuff? New path, translate, rotate, sign, translate. This is all PostScript, the way it works, the way it can be resolution independent on every printer. Okay, more copyright messages here. Is there anything different? Adobe. No, this all looks the same. Times New Roman is a trademark of Allied Corporation. Here's another one. Times is a trademark of Allied Corporation, and the different font faces, I guess. And then we're almost to the end, and now we have a bunch more of this this stuff. And yeah, okay, that was the first file. Let's check out the second file. I'm assuming more of those strings are in one of these. The other files may be just mostly machine coded. Helvetica. Okay, so I guess these are like the encoded fonts that are built into the printer. So we look through here, Helvetica again. More copyright messages, Helvetica, Helvetica, Helvetica. Looks like the same copyright messages with Adobe and Linotype. And then we have Courier Medium, Courier Bold, more copyright messages. Oh, wait, these are some kind of commands or something. Look at this, /user, /ps, /packages, /init. I wonder if this is like debugging stuff that's left over from the compilation of this OS or fonts or whatever we're looking at here. It's kind of amazing how many times these copyright messages repeat over and over again. I guess they're really trying to protect their copyright here. Bunch more printer-related things, strings, all sorts of commands and things. Okay, that's the end of 1. Let's look at 2. Okay, copyright Adobe Systems, initialization, procedure lost control, invalid exit procedure, unhandled PostScript error, disable interrupt, debug mode. Here's the debug mode again. This is on the processor itself. Check password. And we have some AppleTalk stuff here. Init AppleTalk, open AppleTalk, etc., etc. Blue values, other values, min features, blue fuzz. Another copyright message from Adobe. Got some font stuff here. Set cache limits. Fatal disk error encountered. Reinitializing disk font cache. Okay, so that kind of tells us again, that's what I thought, is that the disk is just a font drive and it really isn't used for booting the OS or anything like that. Okay, moving on to 3. See if anything interesting is in here. Copyright message again from Adobe. Fatal disk error, system rebooting. Interesting. And then we have some directory stuff, DB, display list, source list, more commands, more copyright messages. So far, nothing super interesting. Set packing, current packing, token. Disk appears to be not initialized. Disk status, initialized disk. So again, PostScript commands for controlling the disk. Delete file, rename file, dev mount. Part of me wonders when we were looking at that file that I found that talked about initializing the disk, maybe there's like a PostScript terminal that you can access, and then you can talk to the printer using PostScript commands. Because it seems like the whole OS that this thing is running is PostScript itself, and that's what's able to do all this. There's crypt stuff on here, bin hex, so I guess for encoding. Flush file, another copyright message, more commands. They all look PostScript related, printer related. And our final file, number 4, which I think has a lot of blank space. When I dumped this, I saw a bunch of blank space at the end. So we have sys allocation map, sys directory, read write. Did we see that on the hard drive? I can't remember. Sys root? So a lot less strings in this set of files than the other ones. Fail test equals and data equals. SCSI command, opcode unit address, SCSI error. So it's almost like this stuff is all disk handling routines. Stack stuff, invalid exit, undefined, VM error. Adobe Systems copyright again, all rights reserved. Oh, wow, this is interesting. Look at this. LDIVT.S, so it's like some kind of a library. 1986, copyright Sun Micro. It's cut off, but I bet you it says Microsystems. Look, there's a bunch of this stuff here. So does this tell us that Adobe used Sun workstations, 68,000 based ones maybe, to develop originally this PostScript interpreter, language, OS, whatever? Are these just embedded libraries? Unpacked.s, yeah. Okay, uncaught exception. Wow, that's kind of interesting. You know what I didn't do is run strings on the hard drive image, and I just did that right here. So we have more of these directory kind of structured things. And then I suppose these are all the fonts that are stored on this drive. Now looking at these, they all look pretty standard stuff, at least these fonts. I guess these are PostScript files themselves. Maybe these are like programs that can be run. I don't think these are fonts. I don't know what this FC stuff is. Maybe people watching can recognize this. You have Zaf Dingbats. Oh, we got more fonts down here. Americo, Arena Condensed, Chancery, Cookie, Cookie Italic, Cornet. So I suppose anytime someone printed something on this printer and they used a font that they supplied with their file, so you bring that to your typesetter and it would get cached on this drive. And I guess that's what all this is here. Vagabond, Schoolbook, Park Place. I don't know if these are like the actual glyphs or what those files are. Oh wow, there's a lot of strings here. I mean, who knows how long this thing was used for, so how many fonts were cached on here. Bordeaux, okay, some of these look like they are repeats. Ultra Shadow, Technical. Okay, now we're getting into what look like commands, and I'm wondering if these are like PostScript files that were saved on here. That, for instance, now, you know, we were looking at the directory structure up above, and now we're just looking at the actual file contents. Look at this, some kind of encoded data in ASCII though. Start of sys start code, current file exec. Very interesting. So like an encoded file. Oh, all right, we have some PostScript. That's what PostScript looks like again. And a bunch more encoded stuff, lots and lots of it. And then there's a little bit of readable text, and then it says do it. Is that the execute command in PostScript? And then we have tons more of this encoded stuff here. Oh, but we got like blocks of, well, PostScript in the middle of it. Read-only fonts, and then another file to execute. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on here. Maybe those are the encoded fonts. I don't know. I'm sure people watching will have more of an idea of like how this all works. But at least I have the hard drive image, and even though we think there's potentially a little bit of corruption on here, most of this is probably okay. And if we go all the way to the very end, which is what I did here, anything interesting down here? No. No, I'd say this is not interesting. I had a thought. I wanted to take a look at what the Apple LaserWriter, which I know are PostScript printers, what their RIP boards look like, the main boards. And this is from a LaserWriter 2G, whatever that is, much later version. But almost certainly we have a 68 K processor there, some kind of ROMs that are holding the PostScript engine, and then we have a bunch of RAM. So I think this works in a very similar fashion to what we have right here. It's just this is newer, obviously. It says 1991 on it, And it seems like Apple has, used this large scale integration to reduce the number of ICs like this thing has on it. And incidentally, I'm pretty sure that Apple printers support external SCSI hard drives for font caching. I think that's what's going on with this connector right there. And that's probably SCSI controller IC hooked up to the 68K processor. So looking at Wikipedia, and I know I'm on a little bit of a tangent here, but it is similar to what's happening with this, because all of these printers from Apple had the raster image processor built into them. And the original LaserWriter, which was quite an expensive printer, $20,000, had a 12 megahertz 68,000. So when this came out in 1985, it was faster than Macintosh's. 1.5 megs of RAM, one slot, had 512K of ROM, so nearly as much as this. It's at 640. And I don't think that this original one had a SCSI port on it, not until the later models. And yeah, look, it says right here, at introduction, the LaserWriter had the most processing power in Apple's product line, more than the 8 megahertz Macintosh. Apple's raster image processor was of its own design and was implemented with fewer ICs, including PALs for most combinational logic, with subsystem timing, refresh timing, and rasterization function being implemented in very few medium-scale integrated PALs. Apple's competitors, like QMS, NEC, and others, generally used a variation of Adobe's RIP with large quantity of small-scale integration, 74LS logic. In the same time frame as Apple LaserWriter, Adobe was licensing the very same version of PostScript to Apple's potential competitors. Apple's PostScript licensing were non-exclusive. However, all non-Apple licensed PostScript generally employ one of Adobe's PostScript reference models, Atlas, Redstone, etc. Didn't we see Atlas in this thing? When we were looking at the strings, Atlas was definitely there in that first file. Even Linotype's first image setter, which featured PostScript, employed such a reference model, but was customized for Linotronics' different video interface, plus necessary implementation of banding and a hard drive frame buffer and font store mechanism. Indeed, PostScript language itself was concurrently enhanced and extended to support these high-resolution banding devices as constrained to lower-resolution framing devices such as a LaserWriter. In most cases, the RAM size was fixed and was soldered to the logic board. In late PostScript level 1 and early PostScript level 2, the RAM size was made variable and generally extensible through plug-in SIMs beyond the 2 to 2.5 megabyte minimum frame buffer for lowest resolution devices like 300 dpi. As more than 300 dpi, of course, required more RAM, and some LaserWriters were able to change between 300 and 600 depending on how much RAM. 600 dpi required 6 megs of RAM, but 8 megs of RAM was more commonly found. Interesting how this thing, which we know has like 2400 dpi resolution, only has a 6 megs of RAM. I wonder how that works. For high-end users, the LaserWriter 2 NTX also included a SCSI controller for storage of fonts on a hard drive dedicated for use by the printer. Okay, well, I think I went way off topic there, but that was kind of interesting. And again, that's all doing the same stuff as what this board is doing. This is just the processor that's rasterizing while it's running the PostScript interpreter, and it's rasterizing the entire printed page into its frame buffer and then streaming through the I/O board all of the data that goes directly onto the page. So let's get back to trying to fire this thing up now that all the ROMs are safe and we've kind of scanned and looked through all of them. Now, let's talk about the tantalum situation again. I realize now, when I was testing for shorted tantalums, I had the power supply connected while I was doing it. And I realized that that's not really the right thing to do. Of course, if there was a dead short on here, we would have seen that. But with the power supply not connected to anything, if we go to the 5-volt rail, there's our 15 ohms right there, or 14 ohms. What's happening there is that the capacitors in the power supply are looking like a low impedance source, and that's what's causing this to beep and register that 14 ohms. If I go directly to the connector without it being connected to the power supply, and I know that's a ground pin and that's a 5-volt pin, well, there's nothing. It just said, oh well. Now, it doesn't mean there's no resistance. It's just I have to switch out of continuity mode, which I'll do right now. And we should have like mega ohm, I'm assuming, because the system is obviously not doing anything. Okay, yeah, we're at 460 ohms. That is a much better reading than we were getting before. And I can check on these other pins as well. So that one is nothing. There we go, 460 ohms. Okay, those are ground pins. You know, I don't even think the 12 volts hooked up to this thing, now that I think about it. If we look at the pins that are missing, yeah, it looks like the yellow wire and the brown wire aren't even connected. So there's no pins there. There's no physical pins. So it doesn't even use 12 volts. Okay, well, that's good. Let me plug the I/O board back into the processor, and let's check the impedance with both of these connected together, because I did see a change when the power supply was connected and we checked out the 5-volt rail. Oh, look, we're at 11 ohms. So the I/O board on its own really doesn't present much load at all, but this board does, the big board. There's a regulator here or a transistor or something, and there's our 11 ohms. I don't necessarily think there's a problem here, but there's a capacitor that we might be charging up. I mean, who knows what's going on. It's not a dead short. I think I'm okay to try to power this thing up. Everything is connected that theoretically should make this work or not work. So are we ready to actually see if this thing works or smokes? I am. I'm not going to plug in the blue SCSI until we have this thing actually successfully power up. There are some diagnostic LEDs. Can I get these in view so you can see them? There we go. They're right there on the bottom edge. Sorry, this power cord's kind of in the way. Okay, like that. So you can definitely see them. All right, everyone, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so those LEDs are on. That LED is on. And our front panel display just has a red light. Does this do anything? Oh, I see this LED is on as well. It's just very dim. Orange LED there. Okay, well, no smoke came out of anything, so that's something. But is this thing actually alive? Who knows? We're at 4.78 volts on 5-volt rail. That seems fine. I mean, this thing should be running. It's a little low, but it's not that bad. Let's check out what my power supply is putting out right now. Yeah, we're at 5.08 volts, but I guess there's some voltage drop across this wire here, and you know, there's a bunch of traces this stuff is all going through. There's no reset button or anything on here other than this stop button. It certainly seems to do nothing. So let me see if I power this off. I want to see if these LEDs do anything or all come on at the exact same time. Okay, so this LED comes on a split second later. But then this red LED and this green LED come on exactly the same time. Now, what if I hold down this button when we turn on the system? I'm going to hold it, turn it on. No, that seemed to have no effect. How about I probe around a little bit, see if we see any activity on this beast. So let's see what we see on the 68,000. Well, that sure doesn't look good. I just picked a random pin on it. Not really seeing any signs of life on this thing. Okay, I went on one of the lines on one of the ROM chips. I mean, that's activity. Okay, yeah, there we go. I picked a different line on the CPU. Normal activity there. I should look at a pinout for the CPU because I don't know 68,000 off the top of my head. But it looks like it's working. It's doing something. Now I'm curious. Let's unplug the connector that goes to the other processor board from the I/O board. Let's see if that changes anything with its status LEDs down here. Nope. And nope. This all looks exactly the same. I'm just probing around on this connector that's not connected to anything, and there's, you know, activity on there, but that's fast. That's not just a serial line. I'm looking for kind of serial activity. That's just data bus activity. So yeah, a bunch of the pins here have that type of activity on it. I'm assuming it's all like 16 data bus lines. These lines over here look a bit different. So this could be address lines or vice versa. Yeah, they're a little cleaner. Yeah, these look like address lines to me. One thing I'm pretty confident of with the I/O board is if we turn off the power, when I turn it on, you'll notice that there's no activity for a split second, and then the thing comes out of reset and starts executing. Watch. So there we go. So it's like in reset and then comes out of reset. So this one seems to be doing stuff. How about this board? So on this board, I decided to just probe around on the serial controller because I know these top pins are data bus lines. Well, that doesn't look super great. I'm sure that this thing is hooked up not directly to the data bus on the CPU. It's probably going through buffers or these FIFOs or something. But all the data bus lines look like that. And that doesn't seem right. I'm wondering if this thing is not coming out of reset, possibly. Like, is the CPU just rebooting itself over and over again? CPU is warm. Nothing's burning hot on here. Just lots of stuff is warm. Let's check these EEPROMs here. I mean, there's certainly activity, but that does not look correct for normal operation. And if you notice the cadence of what we're seeing here, it was very similar to that weird pattern on the the serial controller chips. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, this thing does not seem like it's executing correctly. Just for fun, I'm going to disconnect this connector that goes from the I/O board to this, and we'll leave the power hooked up. I want to see if that makes a difference. Let's see what this looks like now. Well, it seems like this thing is not doing anything now. Like it's totally stuck. In fact, look at this. That's data line stuff. That looks messed up. So I'd say there's definitely like a fault on this board. It really feels like something's wrong here. Let's go back to the super serial data lines. Oh, well, look at that. It almost looks better. That's interesting. Let's power cycle this. So it started with nothing, and then that sort of appeared. Very interesting. I mean, I don't think this is like quite considered normal operation, but it's certainly different. But again, we go to the ROMs and they all look like this. Let me just check a pinout for one of these so I make sure I know what I'm probing. All right, so if we put the phone here, what I was on was one of the address lines for that ROM chip. And the data lines are down here, so that's the data line. I mean, that just doesn't look right. That does not look right at all. And the address lines are the ones that... Oh, well, look, there's actually some activity now on there. Okay, not that one. Okay, yeah, I see. That line just was not doing much. All the address lines are going to be probably paralleled on these. It's all about the chip select lines going to these, which is on the other side over here, which you can't really get to the way the board is situated. But again, the data lines have that weird thing going on. That just doesn't look normal, what we see there. Let's get this plugged back in. And we turn this on now. It did the same thing where the amber light took just a split second to come to life. And now we check these address lines. And it's doing that pulsing again. And let's check data lines. Pulsing. It really, really, really feels like this thing is constantly resetting. That's what feels like happening with this board. This other board, on the other hand, it seems to be working. This one is the one that's having an issue. One last thing I'd like to do is see if I can check out the reset line on the CPU. Now, this is for the math coprocessor or floating point unit. And I looked up the pinout for this, and it's going to have a shared reset line with the CPU. So I've just applied power, and I'm in roll mode on the oscilloscope. And we have 5 volts there. Then we should have 5 volts, ground. Yep. And then we should have the reset line. So just like the 6502, it's in reset when this signal is low. Now, this thing is currently not doing any kind of reset looping like I theorized. And if I turn off the power and we turn it back on, there we go. You can see there was a little thing there where it was down low and then it went out of reset. So the reset circuit actually appears to be working fine on here, even though we see this strange behavior on these address lines. And let's speed up the time base so you can see it happening again. There we go. This is what I was talking about, which looked like it was in some kind of a reset loop. And on the data lines, which are down here on these EEPROMs, I mean, that does not look like normal operation. It really does not. This is not what it should be doing. Let me reset the power while we look at this line, just to see if it does anything different for a split second. Well, I don't know. Maybe it does execute some code. I fell off the pin there, so we'll turn it back on. Nothing. Then there was some activity, and then it kind of goes into that loop. Maybe that's normal, and it's just waiting to talk to the I/O engine on the other board. I'm on a different line now. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it kind of does some other stuff and then gets stuck in this loop. So maybe this is normal behavior. Incidentally, we do have the clock for the CPU and the math coprocessor right here. I'll have to speed up the time base so we can look at what that is. And there it is, 16 megahertz, pretty much exactly like we thought, because this is a 16 megahertz chip and we have that 33 megahertz crystal right there. And on that bombshell, I think I'm going to have to end this video here. I'm quite sure that this main processor board with the 68020 is not working properly. Definitely seems like it's stuck in a reset loop. Even if it weren't so, I'm not really sure what I could do with it. I can look to see if there's activity like we could see on the IO board. But clearly, it's not running code properly on this processor board. Now, I suppose what could happen is I will put all the ROMs that I have here on archive.org. Maybe people could do some decompilation, reverse engineering, and try to figure out if there is indeed some kind of serial mode that would be possible to access on these devices. Maybe with the 6522, the CIA chips that are on here, maybe I short a pin or pull it high or low, and that will turn on the debugging mode. That will go then over the regular serial port. That's all completely possible. But I really don't think this thing is running any kind of normal OS. This is based on what we saw in the ROMs, the Atlas Adobe PostScript engine, RIP engine. So people may have documented more about how it works, but I have a feeling this is kind of based on a reference design without a lot of customization. And yeah, this doesn't run a regular OS for us to connect into and execute commands on, or other than PostScript commands. Now, what's kind of interesting about this IO board is it's running, and it's a full-featured single-board computer, really, if you think about it. It's got ROM, it's got RAM, 68,000 processor, and it has that asynchronous UART chip that's on there, which could theoretically allow us to replace the firmware on here and actually connect into this thing and use it as a little general-purpose computer. As for the rasterization engine that's on here, on the other hand, I'm not quite sure about that because it's a lot more complex, and who knows how the interfaces work between the serial ports and the RAM and all that kind of stuff. If anyone's interested in taking a look at the hard drive image or any of those ROM dumps that I've made, I've uploaded all of it to archive.org. Perhaps someone will discover something really interesting about this, like a secret test mode we can maybe go into, and it's able to be deciphered from the ROM files. Now, while this exploration process of this system did not result in it working or us getting access to a hidden debug terminal, I still found this exploration extremely fascinating, and I hope you did as well. And I feel this type of hardware was something that a lot of design work went into making because they had to be reliable and, were very expensive, but it's also something that a lot of consumers like us haven't really ever seen. So I was really happy to be able to show off some of this, and yeah, even though I couldn't get it working, so to speak, it's still really cool to take a look at. And like I said, I really, really enjoyed myself here. So that is going to be it for this video. Thank you, Joe, for sending this thing in. Thumbs up if you liked this video, thumbs down if you didn't. Huge thanks to my supporters, and their names are on the side of the screen to make it possible this full time, all the usual YouTube stuff. And, comment down below on what your thoughts about this whole thing is. And that is going to be that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.